The day my father died was the day our family business began to crumble. I still remember standing in the hospital corridor, the antiseptic smell burning my nostrils as the doctor delivered the news with practiced sympathy. Heart attack. Sudden. Nothing they could do. My mother collapsed into my brother's arms while I stood frozen, wondering how the world could keep spinning when ours had just stopped. I'm Sophia Morgan, and until that moment, I'd been the chief operations officer at Morgan Logistics, the shipping company my father had built from nothing over 30 years. I'd worked my way up from the warehouse floor during summer breaks, through college internships, and finally to the executive suite. Not because I was Malcolm Morgan's daughter, but because I'd earned it. Every promotion, every success came through sweat and strategy. But my father's will contained a surprise none of us expected. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m., my Uncle Richard said 3 days after the funeral, his voice flat over the phone. I expect you'll want to be there. I hadn't even taken off my black dress yet. Can't it wait? We just buried him. Business doesn't stop for grief, Sophia, he replied. Besides, there are matters that need immediate attention. The tone in his voice sent a chill down my spine. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom I'd sat in hundreds of times before. The familiar mahogany table now felt like foreign territory. My Uncle Richard sat at the head of my father's chair with his son Victor beside him, wearing a suit that looked fresh off the rack. Victor, my cousin, who'd spent more time on yachts than in offices, who'd failed upward through 3 different departments before landing a cushy Director of Special Projects title that everyone knew was meaningless. Let's begin, Uncle Richard said, not waiting for the usual pleasantries. As you all know, Malcolm's passing was unexpected. According to his will and the company bylaws, his controlling shares transfer to his next of kin. My mother nodded. Yes, to be divided between his children and... Actually, Richard interrupted, sliding a document across the table. That's not quite correct. I picked up the paper, scanning it quickly. My hands began to shake. This can't be right. Richard's tight smile didn't reach his eyes. Your father amended his will last year. The controlling interest passes to me as his brother and co-founder, with the intention that I prepare the company for the next generation of leadership. What next generation? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been running operations for 5 years. My brother has been CFO for 3. Victor leaned forward, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Times are changing, cousin. The company needs fresh vision. I looked around the table at the board members, men and women who had watched me grow up, who had worked alongside me for years. Most couldn't meet my eyes. They'd already known. This had been planned. Fresh vision? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping. You've never even seen the inside of our main distribution center. That's enough, Richard snapped. The decision is made. I'll be assuming the role of CEO effective immediately. Victor will be taking over as COO. My position, just handed to him. And what about me? I asked, already knowing the answer. We value your institutional knowledge, Sophia, Richard said with practiced corporate sympathy. We'd like you to stay on as an advisor during the transition. After that, we can discuss other opportunities within the company. Translation. We're demoting you to nothing and eventually pushing you out, but we'll do it slowly to avoid bad press. I wanted to flip the table, to scream, to demand justice for the years I'd given this company. Instead, I stood up calmly, buttoned my blazer, and said, I understand. Please have HR send the paperwork to my office. As I walked out, I heard Victor whisper to his father, that was easier than I thought. They had no idea what was coming. For the next 6 weeks, I played the role they expected, the grieving daughter gracefully accepting her new diminished position. I cleared out my corner office for Victor without complaint, moving to a windowless room near accounting. I smiled politely in meetings where Victor took credit for my projects. I nodded when Richard announced sweeping changes that undid years of my careful work. But every night, I went home and worked on my plan. The first red flag appeared within a month of the takeover. Our largest client, Zhang International, requested an urgent meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but Mei Zhang herself called me afterward. Sophia, what's happening over there? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Victor just tried to raise our rates by 22% with no explanation. When I questioned it, he said something about market adjustments and acted like I should be grateful. I gripped my phone tighter. May, I'm so sorry. I wasn't aware of this change. Well, be aware that if this is the new direction of Morgan Logistics, we'll be taking our business elsewhere. We've worked with your family for 15 years, but loyalty has its limits. After we hung up, I made a careful note in the spreadsheet I'd been compiling. Client alienation, Jang International. Potential revenue loss, $13.4 million annually. It wasn't the last call I received. One by one, clients and vendors reached out, confused by the sudden changes, the dropped ball, the arrogance from management. Each time, I expressed sympathy, promised to look into it, and documented everything. Meanwhile, Victor was making his presence felt throughout the company. He fired 3 department heads who had been loyal to my father and me, replacing them with fraternity brothers who knew nothing about logistics. He slashed the employee training budget to pay for a company-wide rebranding that nobody had asked for. He even had the audacity to remove my father's portrait from the lobby. It didn't match the new aesthetic, he explained with a shrug when I confronted him. But his most dangerous move came in the 3rd month when he signed off on a deal with Westland Shipping, our biggest competitor, and a company known for cutting corners on safety regulations. We're not merging with Westland, I said in the board meeting, speaking up for the first time in weeks. They've had 3 safety violations in the past year alone. Their insurance premiums are through the roof. Victor rolled his eyes. It's a strategic partnership, not a merger. And frankly, Sophia, your input wasn't requested. I looked at my uncle. Dad would never have approved this. Richard at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Malcolm isn't here anymore. We have to move forward. That night, I made my most important call yet. Mr. Santiago, this is Sophia Morgan. I think it's time we had that conversation you proposed before my father passed. Eduardo Santiago had been trying to convince my father to take Morgan Logistics public for years. As one of the most respected investment bankers in the industry, his interest had been flattering, but Dad had always insisted on keeping the company private. Once you answer to shareholders, he'd say, you stop answering to your conscience. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Miss Morgan, Eduardo's smooth voice came through the phone. I was very sorry to hear about your father. He was a man of principle. Yes, he was, I replied, which is why I need your help. The company is in trouble. We met the next day at a cafe 3 towns over, where no one would recognize us. For 2 hours, I laid out everything that had happened since the takeover. The client complaints, the reckless spending, the dangerous Westland deal, the projected financials that showed we'd be underwater within a year if Victor continued on his current path. Eduardo listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he studied me carefully. What exactly are you proposing, Sophia? I took a deep breath. A hostile takeover. I want to buy back control of my family's company. He raised an eyebrow. With what capital? Your shares alone won't be enough. I've been approached by 3 of our competitors in the past week alone. They smell blood in the water. If we move quickly, we can secure backing for a leveraged buyout before the company loses too much value. Eduardo leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. Your father would be proud and terrified. My father taught me to protect what matters, I replied. Now, are you in or out? I'm in, he said, extending his hand. But you realize this will get ugly. I thought of Victor sitting in my office, of my father's legacy being dismantled piece by piece. It already is. For the next 2 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the dutiful advisor, nodding along in meetings, while Victor drove the company further into the ground. By night, I worked with Eduardo and a team of financial analysts, crafting a buyout strategy that would stand up to scrutiny. The hardest part was approaching the other board members. Most had known me since childhood, but business relationships complicated everything. One by one, I met with them privately, showing them the numbers, reminding them of their fiduciary duty. Some were immediately supportive. Others needed more convincing. Richard has been with the company from the beginning, argued Dorothy Levinson, our longest-serving board member. Are you sure this isn't just about your pride? I showed her the latest financial projections. This isn't about pride, Dorothy. It's about survival. At the current burn rate, we'll be insolvent within 18 months. Slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. Malcolm would be heartbroken to see what's happening. Then help me fix it. By the time the quarterly earnings meeting approached, I had secured tentative support from 4 of the 7 board members. Not enough for a guaranteed win, but enough to make a stand. The night before the big meeting, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city lights, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. What if I failed? What if I succeeded but couldn't save the company? What if this destroyed what remained of my family? My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Alex. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I've got your back. Dad would be with you all the way." That was all I needed. The boardroom fell silent as I walked in the next morning. I took my usual seat near the middle of the table, placing a slim folder in front of me. Uncle Richard eyed it warily as he called the meeting to order. "Before we begin," I said, not waiting for him to finish the preliminaries, "I'd like to propose an addition to the agenda." Victor snorted. "We've already finalized." "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current leadership," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "And I propose a restructuring of executive management." The room erupted. Richard's face turned scarlet as he pounded the table. "This is outrageous. You have no authority." "Actually," I interrupted, opening my folder and distributing copies of the documents inside, "as a board member and shareholder, I have every right to call for this vote. And I've brought evidence demonstrating why it's necessary." The papers spoke for themselves. Client cancellations totaling over $40 million in lost revenue, employee turnover at an all-time high, the disastrous financial terms of the Westland deal, and most damning of all, evidence that Victor had been steering contracts to a shell company partially owned by his college roommate. "This is slander," Victor hissed, but his face had gone pale. "It's all documented," I replied calmly, "and verified by our external auditors." Dorothy Levinson cleared her throat. "I second the motion for a vote." Richard looked betrayed. "Dorothy, we've been friends for 30 years. And in those 30 years I've never seen such mismanagement," she replied. "Malcolm built this company on integrity and smart business. What's happening now is neither." The vote was 5-2 in favor of removing Richard and Victor from their positions. As security escorted them from the building, Victor shouting threats of lawsuits, all the way I felt no triumph, only relief, and a deep sadness that it had come to this. The emergency press release went out that afternoon. Morgan Logistics announces leadership changes. Sophia Morgan named CEO. The rebuilding began immediately. I reached out personally to every client we'd lost, promising a return to the service standards they'd come to expect. I reinstated the employees who'd been unfairly dismissed. I canceled the Westland deal, absorbing a painful penalty but saving us from a far more costly disaster down the road. And I rehung my father's portrait in the lobby, right where it belonged. 6 months later, Morgan Logistics was back on solid ground. We'd regained most of our lost clients and even expanded into 2 new markets. The board unanimously approved my 5-year strategic plan, which included an employee ownership program that would have made my father proud. I heard through industry channels that Uncle Richard had retired to Florida, his reputation tarnished but his finances intact. Victor wasn't so lucky. After failing to find another executive position, he'd been reduced to asking former business associates for investment opportunities. No one was returning his calls. One rainy Tuesday, I was working late when my assistant buzzed to say I had a visitor. I looked up to see my uncle standing awkwardly in my doorway, older and grayer than I remembered. "May I come in?" he asked. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where I'd sat months ago as he stripped away my position. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quickly. I wanted to tell you that I was wrong, about you, about what the company needed." I said nothing, waiting. "Malcolm knew what he was doing all along, grooming you to take over." I convinced myself he was being sentimental, choosing his daughter over more qualified leadership. He looked around my office now with a mixture of regret and admiration. "But the numbers don't lie. You've done in 6 months what I couldn't have done in 6 years." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He shrugged, suddenly looking every bit his age. "Peace of mind, maybe?" Or maybe I just wanted to see for myself that my brother's legacy was in good hands after all. After he left, I sat for a long time, thinking about the cost of ambition, the value of patience, and the weight of a legacy. I thought about my father, who built something precious and trusted me to protect it. And I thought about Victor, who wanted power without understanding responsibility. The next morning, I called an all-staff meeting. Standing on the same stage where my father had delivered countless addresses over the years, I looked out at the faces of people who had weathered the storm alongside me. A company isn't just a business, I told them. It's a community, a family. And like any family, we're strongest when we remember what truly matters, not profit margins or market share, but integrity, hard work, and taking care of each other. As applause filled the room, I glanced up at my father's portrait on the wall. We did it, Dad, I thought. We saved what matters. And somewhere, I was sure he was smiling.